Hello and welcome to our next lesson about the American Civil War. And in this lesson, we're going to see how this new country that was being developed starts to divide into two. And it starts separating to a point where they actually considered themselves two different countries. We had the Union that was trying to maintain the United States, and on the other side, we see this new group of people calling themselves the Confederate States of America, where they created their own flag, they created their own money, and they were trying to make themselves their own country. And this country was dividing separately into two groups, while some people were trying to keep this country together. So let's look at the American Civil War. We see this divide between the North and the South. And there are many things separating these two groups of people. A lot of things about them. First, let's talk about the money. When we looked at the lesson over the economy of these areas, the North primarily relied on a lot of industry. We see these factories, we see factory workers, we see this economy. In the South, we see large farms called plantations, where they were growing crop, cotton, tobacco, indigo. And up north, we see blue-collar workers. We see more people, and those people are working, making money. In the South, we see a very lower population of people, but a very, very wealthy people. We see fewer people, but those few people own these huge farms and have a lot of money. So few people with a lot of wealth. Here we see a lot of people, but more working class blue collar jobs, making those wages so they can participate in the economy. When we look at population of people, again, larger cities in the north, New York, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Boston, New Haven, huge cities, huge development. And in the south, it's still very rural, large plantations, large farms, which also means a lot of slave labor. A lot of the slave population at this point is primarily in the south. There was some in the north, but primarily in the south. Fewer people, but very rich plantation owners. Now we start seeing this conflict. We start seeing this conflict of ideology. Is slavery bad? And in the North, with their industry, they're saying, yeah, it's bad. We want people that are making money and contributing to the economy. We're in a country where we think all people are created equal, and that doesn't affect the color of your skin. Humans are humans, and we believe in human rights. And in the South, they were like, no, slavery is it's needed, it's vital to our economy, and our farms would not be successful without this large free manual labor. There was also the concept of, can Black people vote? If they are humans and we give them human rights, are they going to actually vote and affect politics? Could they run for office? Could they become leaders and politicians? And the North really starts to, like, yeah, we can count them as people, we should count them as population, and they should actually get the right to vote too, because they are American citizens. That was another issue. Are they actually citizens of America, not just property? Well, how do we make them citizens? Then there was this conflict of what we call states' rights. Should states with more people have more power? In the North, we see these large cities, New York City, Boston, Philadelphia. We see a lot more people. Should those places affect the lawmaking process more? Should they have more power in the decisions of the US government because they have more people? Or should the South have just as much power because they are one of the states of the United States of America? There was this question, what's more important? Owning land and being this successful landowner with this large farm, or having a job where you're making minimum wage, just going to work every day? Which one has more job security? Which one is more fulfilling? People in the South said this is the American dream. The American dream is owning your own land, being self-sufficient, having your own business, being able to take off work whenever you want to take off work, And in the North, they were like, no, you need job security. You need to be that worker in the factory and work hard. And then you work up to be the foreman, then you work up to be the manager, and you work your way up in a company, making more and more money. And the more you work, the more money you make participating in the local economy. And it's really kind of this conflict that we see in one of my favorite movies called The Wizard of Oz. Now, The Wizard of Oz is really actually telling us about the 1930s and the 1920s, not during the Civil War, but it's still that same argument. Do you want to be a factory worker where you just work and work and work yourself to death to the point where your joints don't even work? Or are you this uneducated, uncivilized country bumpkin that can't think and can't think critically because has never left the farm and has never seen the world and is really ignorant of what's actually out there in the world? Which one is more beneficial? And it's kind of showing the pros and cons of these two types of society. But in the South, we see primarily farmers, and in the North, we're seeing a lot more industry workers. Also, we see this split in education. If we think of large universities and the Ivy League specifically, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, all of those universities are located in the North. The South does not have any large, prestigious universities. So it is this idea of the North really consider themselves, we're smarter than you. We have Harvard and we have Yale and we have Columbia and Brown and we have these universities, and we're well educated and we're diverse and we understand international politics so much better than you ignorant country bumpkins. And that's kind of we seeing this separation of ideology that creates this conflict. And this conflict eventually separates the nation. The South separates, creates their own country, calling themselves the Confederate States of America. They create their own flag that we can see in this image and we can see behind me, the symbol of the Confederate States of America. And they called themselves these two. We have the Union and we have the Confederate States of America. And we had this conflict. And this war lasted for 4 years in US history. It was a very devastating war for the American people, because any civil war is devastating for its people, because in this war, everyone is from the same country. They called it the war where it was brother against brother, sister against sister, father against son. Family members were divided. Some families were supporting the Confederates, some families were supporting the Union, and they were fighting each other. And everyone was Americans. They were all part of this one country, killing and fighting each other. So after that 4 years, when you look at the death toll, everyone who died was part of the same country. So it was very devastating at this time period. So some of the issues that led up to the Civil War, slavery was a big ideological issue. The North saying, nope, we want to abolish slavery, we want to make them free. There were these economic issues, the idea of industry versus agriculture and which one was more important, not necessarily realizing the interconnectedness between the two, that industry relied on the products that agriculture was producing so they could make their products. But then it was this conflict of people. We have this middle class group of workers working for wages, or that rich, prestigious landowner. And then finally, the last one were states' rights. Which one's more important? Really large cities with large amounts of workers, or ruler states with less people, but there are still states? Which one is more important? Population or being a state? So, our first reading. During the era of the American Revolution, northern and southern states were united behind the common goal of gaining independence from Britain. However, as time went by, differences between two regions grew pronounced. With the beginning of the 1800s, the South remained primarily agricultural, and the Southern economy centered on plantations and the use of enslaved Africans. The Northern economy, on the other hand, featured growing commercial and industrial sectors and adding to agriculture. And these differences caused economic and ideological friction between the North and the South. Disputes over states' rights emerged, and questions arose about the morality and legality of slavery in the United States territories. So again, we're looking at this division of industry versus agriculture. So first question, what is the first effect of the regional differences that emerged between the North and the South in the early 1800s? I have A, northern states strongly supported states' rights. The South began using labor of enslaved people. The North economy began increasingly diverse, and the North farmers began establishing plantations. Well, first I'm going to eliminate D, because I know that the North did not have plantations. That was in the South. I'm also going to eliminate A, the North supporting states' rights. And that's not true. The North was interested in population. The South was interested in states. The South, having less people, was like, no, a state is just as important as any state because they're a state. And the North was like, well, we have a lot more people. We have places like New York City, Boston Harbor, that they should be focusing on population, not whether you're a state or not. So we have B and C. The South began using labor of enslaved Africans, and the North economy became increasingly diverse. The word that sticks out to me here is began using enslaved people. Did they begin using enslaved people in the 1800s, or was it something that was already going on? What was our big change? What was that regional difference? What caused that big regional difference? And again, our answer is C. The Northern economy became increasingly diverse. That idea of introducing industry really changed the mindset, the economy, society altogether by having that industry involved. All right, next question. Many people still debate why Americans fought the Civil War. Some historians claim the war was about state rights, while others believe the war was fought over slavery. However, no confusion existed when the South fired on the North's front Sumter in 1861. The Vice President of the Confederate States, Alexander Stephens, gave his famous cornerstone speech in March 1861, shortly before the war started. All right, reading this passage, some things we need to point out that's really important. So we know Confederate States is at the North or the South. That is the South, the Confederate States. So it is this new people that just created. And so Fort Sumter is where they're located, and he is the vice president. So he is one of the political leaders of this new country, the Confederate States of America. So you have to think, what is his perspective? Is he going to support slavery? Yes. Is he going to support industry or agriculture? He's most likely going to support agriculture. He's all about the South, states' rights. Let's see if we can read through his speech and kind of tease some of that out. Again, the GED is not expecting us to understand every single word. The GED is expecting us to take a historical document and see the big picture and to think critically and to do exactly what we just did. I saw Confederate States. That makes me think it is the South. What do I know about the South? They supported slavery, they supported agriculture, and they supported states' rights. Let's see if we can find those things in here. Here's his speech. The new Constitution has put at rest forever all of the agitating questions relating to our particular institution of African slavery as it exists amongst us, the proper status of the Negro in our form of civilization. This was the immediate cause of the late rapture and present revolution. So what is he saying here? Well, we see African slavery, we see the status of the black man, of the Negro, and saying that this was the cause of this revolution. So it's like, hey, we're separating. There's this conflict. We're going to be fighting for our freedoms. This war is going to be a civil war. We're fighting, and what's causing it is the slave population and how we view them differently. Let's keep reading. Jefferson, in his forecast, had anticipated this as the rock upon which the old Union would split. He was right. What was conjectured with him is now a realized fact, but whether he fully comprehended the great truth upon which that rock stood and stands may be doubted. The prevailing ideas entertained by him and most of the leading statesmen at the time of the formation of the old Constitution were that the enslavement of the African was in violation of the laws of nature, that it was wrong in principle, socially, morally, and politically. It was an evil they knew not well how to deal with. But the general opinion of the man of the day was that somehow or other in the order of providence, the institution would be advancent and pass away. This idea, though not incorporated in the Constitution, was the prevailing idea at that time. The Constitution, it is true, secured every essential guarantee to the institution while it should last, and hence no argument can be justly urged against the constitutional guarantees thus secured because of the common sentiment of the day. Those ideas, however, were fundamentally wrong. They rested upon the assumption of the equality of races. This was an error. It was a sandy foundation, and the government built upon it fell with the storm came and the wind blew. Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination, and the superior race is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon the great physical, philosophical, and moral truths. This truth has been slow in the process of its development. Like all other truths in the various departments of science, it has been so even among us. So I'm going to go back and talk about what is our big picture of what he's talking about here. So he starts off talking about Jefferson, one of our former leaders, and the leading statesman who created our Constitution. So he's talking about the Constitutional Convention, George Washington, Adams, Thomas Jefferson, all of them getting together, creating the Constitution of the United States. And that they had a view that the enslavement of African people were basically against the law of nature. Like, it was wrong. That we believe in that all men are created equal. But they didn't actually put it in the Constitution to abolish slavery at that time. But what this leader of the Confederates, again, we're talking about, this is the vice president of the Confederate, this new country that is in the South. So they support slavery, they support agriculture, and they support states' rights. He's talking about the old Constitution, and he was like, their ideas were completely wrong. When they said all men are created equal, they really didn't mean all men are created equal. That they believed in this equality of races. And that was an error. That was a mistake. We believe, here in the Confederate, in the South, the foundations are laid. The great truth, we believe in the truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man. That slavery, they are a subordination, or meaning below, to a superior race, the white man, and that is his natural condition. So, what is this vice president of this country saying? Is he saying all men are created equal? Or is he saying, no, us as white, rich farmers, we are better and higher than the Negro population? And that's exactly what he's saying. He's supporting slavery and justifying it, saying, no, it is our right that there is no equality of races. We are better than them. We are superior to them, and they are below us. And that was the ideology, not just of people, not just of citizens or farmers, but of their vice president. Think about that. The leader of this group, their vice president, had this mindset. Let's look at our questions. So, first one. Stephen includes a quote from President Thomas Jefferson. Does the rock upon which the old Union would split refer to slavery or states' rights? Are we talking about slavery or states' rights? If you said slavery, you are correct. We are talking all about slavery, and we saw it throughout the passage. I'm talking about are all men created equal. B. Stephen claims that Jefferson and the other American forefathers believed slavery would cease to exist due to the order of. Let's go back and read our passage. I see the order of providence. Somehow or other in the order of providence, the institution would be advancement and pass away. So the order of providence is what I'm seeing. And it was this idea of the violation of the laws of nature. That was wrong, that all men are created equal. The order of providence. And 4, the institution of slavery, claims Stephen, is a natural and normal condition because the white and the African races are unequal. If you said unequal, you are correct. That is what he believed as the vice president of the Confederate. One movie that I would highly recommend is called 12 Years a Slave. It came out a few years ago, and it really shows this time period of how drastically different it was, living in the North and living in the South, and the mindset of the people. And this movie is about a man who is a free man, Black African, living in an African American living in the north part of the United States. And I believe he's a musicianist and he's playing. And he goes down, I think, close to Virginia, where it's like right along that border of where the South is. And in the middle of the night, he's actually kidnapped and captured by this group of people, taken to the South, and then sold into slavery. But he was free up in the North with a wife and kids, and he ends up being sent into slavery and having to work as a slave for 12 years. And it's the story of his life. It's based on a true story, very moving story. But one thing I wanted to talk about was the Confederate flag. So we just read that speech of the vice president and that ideology of literally, we are superior, we are better as white men, we are better than the Negro population. And that mentality of the Confederate flag really being a symbol of that ideology. And so today, in the 21st century, there is a debate of the Confederate flag of whether it can be used or not. And that debate of, is it freedom of speech? That, oh, it's my freedom of speech to wave this flag, or is the Confederate flag a symbol of hatred? It's a symbol of inequality, that symbol of racism and hatred. Which is it? And a lot of people today are viewing the Confederate flag as a symbol of hate. And you cannot use the Confederate flag because it is that connected to that same ideology that we just read from the Vice President of the Confederate States. That same ideology that even though once the Civil War ends, that ideology still sticks around for over 100 years afterwards, where we see the segregation movement, that idea of we're still better than you, that separate but equal. You have your bathroom and I have my bathroom. You have your water fountain, I have my water fountain. You have your school, I have my school. And really kind of keeping them separate, that ideology of we're still better than you. And just that hatred that you still thought about, no, I don't want to go to school with African Americans, that we saw during the civil rights movement and the segregation of the 1960s and 70s, which we will spend an entire class looking at just the civil rights movement and segregation. So this leads us to our next reading, to Civil War and the amendments. After the American Civil War and the United States comes back together and the Union is still created and the South is brought back in and the country is solidified, the US government passes 3 new amendments to the US Constitution. And if you remember when we talked about the US Constitution, it is made up of all of these amendments or laws, and they developed the Constitution in a way to constantly be changing. That as society evolves, as morals and ethics evolve, the society can make those changes to match the society in which we live. So after the Civil War, they decided, all right, it is time that we need to really kind of put these ideas down in stone and say, all right, we're going to make a new amendment, and this is what we're going to say. So 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. Let's look at the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment was ratified on December 6, 1865. It abolished slavery within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Although Congress abolished slavery in the District of Columbia in 1862, the President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation ended the practice of slavery in Confederate states in 1863. Slavery was not abolished throughout the nation until the 13th Amendment was ratified. Many states passed laws to protect the rights of African Americans, but white people who were against racial equality, mostly from the South, fought against similar laws when Congress tried to pass them. But in 1865, slavery is now officially illegal and abolished in the United States. Which is interesting because 1865, 100 years later, in 1960s, this is still the ideology and imagery that we're seeing. They abolish it, but yet 100 years later, you still see that ideology of superiority, of no, we're better than you. No, we don't want this, which is crazy. 14th Amendment. So 3 years later, in 1868, Congress ratified the 14th Amendment, sometimes called the Great Amendment, on July 9th, 1868. The amendment granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including former enslaved people, and provided all citizens with equal protection under the laws, extending the provisions of the Bill of Rights to the states. So now it's like, nope, all people are now American citizens, US citizens, including these people that are African Americans. They are Americans and they have the same rights that we talked about under the US Constitution: freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, unlawful searches and seizures, all of those amendments in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, everyone has access to those. That it's constitutional and that everyone has those rights. It also prohibited any states from making or enforcing any laws that took away or hurt an individual's civil rights. So we're really starting to talk about the civil rights. But again, 1865, fast forward 100 years, and this is still the imagery that we're seeing. So it took the United States society a long time. And even now, today in the 21st century, we're still overcoming a lot of these issues of bias, unconscious bias, and a lot of these issues that we see in American society of still a little bit of segregation, for sure. 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment was ratified February 3rd, 1870, to protect freed African Americans' voting rights. Here is where the African American population in the United States now gets the right to vote, but just men. Women still, in 1870, did not have the right to vote. It takes about 40 to 50 years later before women get the right to vote. which I think is also one of those baffling moments in history. It took 50 years after African Americans get the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. It takes all the way to the 19th Amendment in 1919, 1920 for women to finally get the right to vote. 1920. What? History is so fascinating. So the 15th Amendment, it prohibited the national and state government from disenfranchising voters on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So again, seeing a lot more of those civil rights. After the 15th Amendment was passed, a large number of freedmen voted during the late 1860s through the 1880s. All right, let's look at our first question. Which of the following was the direct effect of the ratification of the 14th Amendment? 13, 14, 15. 14th, what did it do? Slavery was abolished. Former enslaved people became U.S. citizens. President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, or African American men gained the right to vote. The correct answer is B. Former enslaved people became U.S. citizens. Right there. Granted citizenship, 14th Amendment. All right. Here's our reading. Prior to the Civil War's Union victory in 1865, Congress had planned for the challenges America would face, especially the integration of 4 million newly freed African Americans and the readmission to federal representation of former states in rebellion. Congressional Reconstruction included the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which provided legal and civil protection to former enslaved people. Some Southern plantation owners wanted the government to pay them for their former enslaved workers. Many people in the North wanted the newly freed African Americans to remain in the South for fear of losing their jobs to them. Many freedmen were not able to obtain good jobs because of their lack of education and rampant discrimination. The right to vote was an important issue for the newly freed African Americans. Although many people in the South and the North were against the amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments paved an important part in the civil rights movement to come within the next 100 years. And it is true that it is a process over the next 100 years, where it's step by step by step, one victory after next, fighting for actual civil rights. And every day we get closer and closer to the idea of actual equality and equity. We're still working on it, but we're getting closer and closer. 6. What is the primary cause of the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment? Why did they do it? The southern states no longer had the need for enslaved workers. The northern states decided they should be entitled to have enslaved workers too. The Civil War ended, and states forced energy on rebuilding. The Civil War ended, and the South lost. Which one of these is true? Well, let's eliminate some answers, shall we? First one, slave states no longer needed enslaved workers. I know that's not true. They needed them. They were even like, can you pay us for our slave workers at least? Like the farms were really struggling at this time because they were used to running on this really large amount of free manual labor, and then they just lost all of it. And like, now how are we going to get workers? How are we going to afford workers? It was a really challenging time for the agricultural industry. B, the northern states decided that they should be entitled to have enslaved workers too. No, the North never was really interested in enslaved workers. They were interested in paying their workers to participate in the economy. So that leaves only C or D. Which one is a better answer? The Civil War ended, the states focused on energy and rebuilding, or the Civil War ended and the South lost? The correct answer is C, is our correct answer. And it's this idea of rebuilding and the reconstruction of the United States. This idea of, all right, it's over now. How are we going to protect the rights of the people? How are we going to build this country back up? Let's start at the Constitution and engrave these laws to protect these people. So 1865 to 1870, how many years did that take? That's 5 years after the Civil War to pass these amendments. It was a very slow process to get Congress to make these movements. Change takes a very long time. And we even see that over the next 100 years, that change still takes time. They're moving in that direction towards equality and equity, but it takes a lot of time. We see segregation all throughout the 20th century. We see hatred and hate crimes happening during the 20th century. Some great movies that really portray this working towards civil rights over the next 100 years. One great movie I highly recommend is Remember the Titans, that really shows this idea of segregation of schools for whites, schools for blacks, and the first time in the 1970s where black children are going to school with white children for the first time, and the conflict that was happening. But then also the friendships that were being made, the stereotypes that were being knocked down. Beautiful movie. Another movie that came out recently a few years ago is Hidden Figures, was again what it was like not only to be African American during this time, but to be a woman and an African American woman and what they went through during this time of segregation, of again, taking those steps towards equality, getting closer and closer. And another great movie was The Help, that I highly recommend. It's a book and a movie that shows this concept of paid slavery, that we have slave workers in the South that are now starting to get into jobs and they are working and getting money, but is that money really enough to survive? Yes, they're getting wages and they're getting money, but is it really enough? Is it livable wages? And we see The Help later in society as this develops, kind of this income disparity of you have these rich, wealthier white families hiring these black maids and nannies and just kind of the conflict that was happening. But what was beautiful is the relationship that you see among the black workers, the nannies, and the children that they're raising and taking care of, because the young children start to view their nannies as like part of their family and almost like their mom, because they're their nana. They're the ones that have been raising them. They're the ones that take them to the park. They're the ones that cook for them, and they create these amazingly strong relationship with these women in their life. And they really break down those stereotypes of ethnicity and race of like, no, all people are created equal, not the color of your skin, but rather the content of your character. So this is the American Civil War, that conflict between the North and the South. I will see you next time for our next lesson.